Hey guys, we're going to be doing a quick walkthrough tutorial regarding the Quilt project that I've uploaded online. But I just kind of wanted to see you guys, or excuse me, I wanted you guys to see me kind of using InDesign and giving you some steps forward as you complete things. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So at this point, you guys should be seeing the InDesign interface right when you fire things up, where it gives you the option to look at some of those other documents that you've been meddling with. One thing I wanted to do is just go through it really quickly, creating a new document, create new. I'm going to go to print. I'm going to call this, I believe this is project 3. And by the way, I never bump up words and letters next to each other like this. I always add a dash in between. And then I also usually add a descriptor, although I'm not going to be doing that today because this is a tutorial, but essentially that's really handy if, for example, you don't know where a document is, or you're trying desperately to find something that you were working on 1 or 2 weeks ago. And so if you just add the simple description of what you're working on, it can be helpful. I'm going to take off facing pages because I rarely leave that on unless I'm working on an actual magazine or book. But the truth is, even with PDF documents, I want them to scroll up and down, not necessarily left, right. So yeah, this facing pages thing, I honestly don't use all that much for my purposes. But you should always be aware of that because it can change how you're working with a document quite a bit. I'm going to be working with inches, and if I'm not mistaken, the dimensions of the blanket, or the quilt rather, that we're working on is 90. So we're going to go 90 wide and, oops, 99 high. We're not going to worry about columns or gutters today. And I'm just going to hit create. And yeah, that pretty much looks like the dimension of a quilt that we might be working with. Just taking a swig of my coffee here. 1 second, guys. I actually gave you guys a starter file to work with or to start with. I think that's it just kind of provides a little bit of context and information for you guys, basically getting the project done quickly and efficiently. So I'm going to close this out. I'm not even going to save it. And I'm going to go to my Finder, navigate my file system, which should sort of be what you're trying to attain as well, some kind of system so that you know where you can find all of your documents. This is Publication Design 1. And here it is right here, Project 3, Quilt Pattern. You can also see that I'm actually using InDesign to create the project prompts. So yeah, InDesign is handy for lots of things. Creating resumes, handouts, quilt mock-up layouts, apparently. You can do quite a bit with InDesign. It's really amazing. So under assets, I do have some images set up, and the reason why I have those images in this assets folder is so that InDesign can find them. And then I also have a couple of the quilts that I was actually working on. And by the way, this was a real project for me. My wife and I, we like to kind of craft and make things out of fabric. So we make these real, I wouldn't say like super real fancy or nice blankets, but it's kind of nice to have one that you've made that you're sleeping under. So anyway, I had the idea that I wanted to make a flannel blanket for our room, our bedroom. And so yeah, I did all the cutting, and I cut all these guys into, I believe, 9 by 9 inch squares. And then I did an inventory. I kind of found out, after cutting all of these pieces, I calculated how much material I had with what I had to work with. Um, and after that, I took photos of the material, and then I started trying to get an idea how I wanted to lay it out with InDesign. And so the whole purpose, when I was doing it, I realized, wow, this would be a really handy project for students, because it'll really enforce or reinforce the idea of how InDesign works, because a quilt is 90 by 99 inches, the one that we're working on. So that's a lot of real estate or space, two-dimensional space, for a software application to sort of kind of keep up with. But the way InDesign works is it doesn't it doesn't populate the screen with lots and lots of images, or the redundant images of exactly what's happening. What, as far as what you see before you, what it does is it actually takes snapshots of the original file and kind of places it within those viewfinders, so that it doesn't bog down the software, and so your software doesn't crash, essentially. And you can kind of see each of these image files, look, it's 1.9 megabytes. So if, I don't know, imagine 1.9 megabytes times like 100 or 150 or however many of these guys we would be using to kind of shuffle around to create our design. Photoshop would just croak. It may not be able to keep up, dependent on the machine that you're working on. So yeah, what I want to do is, first I'm going to open up the finished file that I had been working on. And you can kind of see it's the same or similar dimension of the file that we were going to get going with. And what I did with this, I had all the, and you're going to see here in a second, but I had all the pieces on the left and right sort of side. I always call this area, no matter what application I'm working with, the back burner. It's like if you're cooking on a stove, you've got your primary things that you're working on up front, but you might have something in the back just kind of there that you're working on or needs to be around. So that's the back burner, and I had all this stuff organized on the back burner and calculated. And then I kind of worked from the center, and this was my method. I worked generally, well, actually, no, I didn't start from the center. I worked from the sides in, and I sort of was trying to mirror things on an X axis and a Y axis. So that's how I ended up with this particular pattern. And of course, you're kind of thinking through things, because as you're working, as I was working, I didn't have equal amounts of the material for each of these different patterns. So it was kind of a visual challenge to try and, make things work so that I don't have two materials just right up against each other. So I wanted to create something a little bit more dynamic and interesting. And so that's kind of what I encourage you guys to do. I'm going to zoom this up so you guys can see it. And, if you wanted to, you could go a step further, and you could dive into these objects. You could rotate that pattern left or right if you really want to get extremely detailed with your quilt. I wasn't quite at that level. I was just more interested in the actual diagrammatic pattern and how things would work in a general sense. And then, of course, you lay it out, after you have all your cut fabric on, and you put it together. So yeah, this is the finished one that I had been working on. And like I said, this was a real project for me. I actually used InDesign to do some planning and thinking and making. So I'm going to close that out, and then I'm going to come over here to the starter file, and you guys should have this uploaded to Blackboard. And along with this file right here that's called begin, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so those are the 5 material patterns that I'm personally working with. The project doesn't ask you to do a quilt in the style that, or in the theme that I did mine. you can do anything you want. But believe it or not, I really like making quilts. I think it's a lot of fun. So you can kind of see, I was actually, this is literally another project that I'm working on. I just haven't, well, I think a lot of the fabric is cut, but it's not completely cut. The stuff does take a while and it's kind of exhausting anyway. That's a side note, but it takes a while. And I do have a second blanket in process, and that's going to be a peacock blanket. So this is an example of how you could change up the theme. And also you notice that these files aren't labeled intuitively. I kind of messed up. I should have gone and changed these files names, and that's my OCD kind of putting me in check. You know, I really like to have my files in extremely good order, and I encourage all of my students to do that for your own process, but also if you're collaborating with team members in a marketing or design office, if you're accessing files on a shared drive, you want to show your professionalism and the way that you manage a document. If someone opens up a document that you've been working on and it's a total mess, it's not going to reflect well on you. And those things do kind of matter, you know. It's just, you know, the nature of being a professional in the field. It's as simple as that. Um, so that being said, click on this document called Begin, and you can kind of see, in fact, I was starting to do this tutorial the other day and I got interrupted, so I had to stop. So this is the new one. So I'm going to put this back to the original material that was there. And so I'm going to hit Command D for place. And you can do it with your keyboard, or you can select the object and then you can come up here to File. And there it is, place. Those shortcuts are really handy, but you notice how it's directing me to this file folder right here. And I could put any of these peacock feather patterns within that object, but instead I'm going to go with the original and put it back to the way that it was. Now look, it's a funny size now. So I'm going to come up here, object, fit, fill frame proportionally. So now we're kind of back to square one. The other thing I wanted to show you with the way that I'd set this document, I know the book at this point is talking about typography and words and so forth, and you can use the text tool to create essentially an object window where you can type some text. It's very, very small right now because the document that we're working with is massive. Again, it's 90 by 99 inches. So what I would have to do so that you can even see that text is I'm gonna have to bump this up to like 300 points, something ridiculous. So yeah, you can create these object text boxes. And then you hit Command A, select the text, and then you can change the font to anything. You can change some of the parameters. You can also change the kerning, which I think is really handy. So yeah, I mean, that's how you, and then notice how this is an object that I can just kind of move around, and also see how it's snapping to the grid. Your project, especially with what you're doing with this quilt, if you're not snapping to the grid, you're going to have a heck of a time. You might be a little bit frustrated, but see how that is just snapping to the grid beautifully. And even if I want to make adjustments, it's going to snap to the grid really nicely. I love the grid. I should have said, here we go. Grid is my friend. That's very true. So we don't need that today. I'm going to delete it, but I'm just trying to show you guys a few things because I know this software might be new to you. But really, there's, you know, you can read the book, you can do these, you can watch these tutorial videos, but at the end of the day, the only way that you're going to know this software is by getting in there and practicing and using it. There's no substitute for that action and that time. And let's face it, if you're a graphic design major, you might be thinking about doing this for a career. So yeah, you're going to be sitting in front of the software a lot, and for better or worse. So I'll just leave that there. But like I said, there's no substitute for just getting down um, to the nitty gritty and using the software and experiencing a little bit of pain and frustration um, uh, when you're first getting started. So I'm going to hit Command 0 so I can see the entire artboard, and then I can zoom out a little bit so that I can see the entire context, because I am using this back burner area for this particular project. Here at the top, I have typography locked down, and you can make that appear or go away, however you please. But the reason why I added this typography was so that you could see the inventory that I've done for each of these materials. So I had to get organized in order to do this project. And you can kind of see visually my method of being organized. I have two classes of materials. I have these 9 by 9 inch textile pieces, and I have these 9 by 4.5 inch textile pieces. So these are the 9 inches, and on the side of those materials are the 4.5 inch pieces. So yeah, that's just so I'm a very visual person. I'm kind of assuming that you are too, if you're in this program or if you're in this class. So I need to see what's in front of me, what I can use. But I'm also kind of mathematical too, and design is about dimensions and making things fit and work constantly. So that being said, I'm going to make the typography go away because I've already done a lot of this work, so that you guys can see. But isn't it handy for you guys to kind of get a sense of how InDesign works, and getting this, you're just kind of dumped into the frying pan, so to speak. The other thing I wanted to mention, you see these like diagrammatic colors there that are associated with each layer. And you can see that all of these objects have that diagrammatic layer surrounding the particular objects that are on that layer. And so that's really helpful too. That's a visual cue so that you can keep your document organized. And obviously this is how I would do it. I always have a typography layer, and it's always up at the top so that it's visible. And then A, B, C, D, E. I have all these materials on separate unique layers. In all honesty, I don't even know how that's going to help me right now. But because I understand good practice and process using this software, I'm just going to do it because it might help me later in an unexpected way. So yeah, you got to be organized. So the next thing I did was I just started grabbing these guys and moving them around. You do have to be careful how you grab some of these objects, because if you grab it from the side, you're going to end up actually accidentally changing the dimension. So yeah, I'm using the black arrow tool, the selection tool, to just move these guys around. And if I zoom in, you can kind of see look at how it just kind of snaps to the grid like that. Okay. And yeah, and I think I had mentioned this, but I did start in a corner like so. So I'm gonna be using a little less discretion, and I'm just gonna start populating all of these pieces into this quilt. And because I'm moving a little bit more quickly, it may not be perfect in the end, so I apologize for that. But I doubt you guys want to watch me build a quilt for 4 hours. It's more of a 30-minute thing. By the way, you're supposed to figure out your own unique theme for this quilt, which basically means that you're going to have to go in and change. You're going to have to find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 patterns, right? And you're going to have to switch out these patterns to meet or accommodate your specific theme. And I think you can go to like Joann's. I think on the PDF, even like it mentioned Stepanova, the constructivist artist, and you can find beautiful images of her fabric textiles that she had created. So all you have to do is select these guys individually, hit Command D again, and select the fabric that meets your theme. And then I might suggest that you say Object, Fill Frame Proportionally. So now if we come up here, we can see that, yeah, the fabric has indeed changed. If you are, if you really, because this beautiful fabric kind of moves in this direction, and dependent on the design of your quilt, you might want to rotate that. So how would you do that? You just dive in, you double click and dive into this object, and you can come up here to Object, Transform, Rotate 90. And look how it went away, right? It's still there. It's just not visible in the window. So all you have to do is select the object again, and then say Object, Fill Frame Proportionally. Okay. So yeah, you can change the direction of your fabrics as well. So I'm gonna hit Command Z, Command Z, Command Z. Command Z, by the way, of course, is the sacred undo, because that just is necessary quite often. By the way, did you see how when I undid those commands and now I'm back to placing, now InDesign is saying, well, I still have this image in my file memory. Where do you want it? Where do you want to place it? So I can just hit Escape and get out of there, because I want my blanket to be the dinosaur theme, but your blanket needs to be something else. Okay. So I would actually advise you, before you even start placing these guys, is to go in and change all your theme with all of your material, because if you place all of these guys and then you go in and change things, I think that might be more work. I think it's easier to change your theme here. Okay. So, and let's see, Command D. Yeah, it looks like you can. I wonder, like, I usually don't do that. I don't place objects in a multiple way. Let's see if this works. So I'm gonna choose Peacock, that one. Yeah. And look, it's not working. No. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to do the hard work and select each of these individually to change out your materials. Sorry, but sometimes the software will only do so much. Okay, so I'm just gonna run through and the way that my mind operates is I kind of, I always want to develop some kind of a system of doing this. And by the way, you could copy this and start doing something like that, but how is that going to alter your quote unquote inventory or the amount of fabric that you have? So I wouldn't suggest that you take that route. I would suggest that you use the inventory that I've kind of set up for you to meet the dimensions of the blanket, because that's part of the design problem as well. Is design is working within constraint and parameters, not just working willy-nilly. You're almost never going to run into a design project that says you have free for all to do whatever you want. That's really the difference between art and design, in a sense, is that design has parameters and constraint, and it's intended to be more functional for a specific use. Art, on the other hand, in my opinion, is much more free flowing, and the function is more rhetorical for like politics and society, and it's not necessarily utilitarian, although that could be argued otherwise. So we're again, I start dragging these guys around after you've changed your theme. Here we go. This is kind of fun. I'm just going to do these 2 rows for you guys, okay? And then I think you'll pretty much, I think you have the hint, you have the general idea. So after this, we need the light dinosaur print, right? By the way, you know, I'm just kind of working intuitively on the screen, but it might not be a bad idea for you to do a sketch as well. And the sketch is a little bit more difficult to replicate exactly because we have these exact material amounts that we have to work with. But you can maybe sketch out like a general kind of theme or idea for how you want, I guess, your system to proceed. So I would encourage you to do a little sketching before you even start with this as well. Also, I encourage you to choose textile patterns that are fun, playful. Obviously, this is a fun project. It's not serious. Design doesn't always have to be serious. Sometimes design just feels good. Definitely, you know, like I like creating utilitarian objects because they can be used. So yeah, that's what I intend to do with this blanket. Okay, so we're back to this kind of brown dinosaur pattern. After the brown comes the black. Okay. And see how I'm kind of I'm trying to mirror what I'm doing a little bit. Again, it's a lot of it is sometimes intuition. Trust your gut, but always start with a sketch. Okay, after black, we have another one of these, which actually works out quite well because we have a lot of this texture or pattern. The other sort of curveball that I'm throwing you guys is that there are these sort of halfway pieces that you have to contend with. And so what I would do is I would keep in mind that 2 of these guys equals one of the other textile dimensions, right? And so you need to use 2 if you're on a row, not an odd number, not 3 or 5. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I think you guys get the gist where you're building your blanket, quote unquote. After you do have your blanket, and actually for that purpose, I'm going to pull up my master quilt file. It's kind of like that trick during a cooking show where they already have it in the oven or whatever. So yeah, this ended up being my blanket, and believe it, that I had everything on the left and right side, just like what you just saw. And so now everything is done. I'm relatively happy with the results. Now I'm going to export a file, and the reason why I literally had to export this file for my wife so that she could have a visual reference, because looking at this document on InDesign is kind of cumbersome. So file, export. You can spit out a JPEG, a PNG, or even a PDF, whatever's convenient for you. So actually for this project, I'm going to spit out a PDF, save. I'm going to think about compression. So I don't know, like with the size of this project, the file size can end up being pretty massive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the quality down to low. And usually I would not do this, but because of the file, the actual physical, you know, rhetorical physical dimensions. And I'm also going to bump this down to screen quality, which is 72 dpi. And it still might be a relatively large document. So by the way, see, like for color images, grayscale images, monochrome images, I usually try to have these guys all on the same page. But yeah, this compression tab is extremely important when you're spitting out documents from InDesign, because essentially, you know, all these images, I took them with my phone, but what if you're finding images online and they're all different qualities? Essentially what this process does is it It takes all those unique parameters of each of those files and kind of brings everything to the same quote unquote normalized level. Okay, so I'm gonna hit export, and it's saying that there's something, let's see, something to do with my color profile. That's not the end of the world. I'm not gonna worry about that. And you can kind of see up here, see this little thinking circle doodad? That means that it's in the process of spitting out your document. So let's give that a second to think. And by the way, let's see, I did send it to the desktop if I'm not mistaken, or no, I wanted to, but it ended up here. So right now it's saying it's 0 bytes. That's because it hasn't come off the frying pan yet. Okay. So now, yeah, it did finally come off, and it is a very reasonable file size. So let's just double check. Let's open it up and see what happened. Yeah, it's a big document, but we can kind of scroll around and see. I did make a mistake right here. You can kind of see, apparently I wasn't in sync with the grid in that moment. But yeah, there you go. You can also export a PNG or a JPEG using that method. So if I wanted to export a JPEG, or a PNG rather, I'm not a big fan of JPEGs. I'm going to put it in that same place. I'm actually even going to, let's see, low, just say 100, keep it at RGB, anti-aliasing, export. Okay. Let's double check our work. Whenever you export something, it's always good to just see how it's doing. Uh-oh, look at this. This is 115 megabytes. So yeah, that's quite a bit. And essentially what I would do, it'll open up, I'm betting, of course. But yeah, you're not going to be able to email this document, conveniently. Although the quality is pretty decent, but you're not going to be able to email this. And someone might be upset on the other end if they have to download a 100 megabyte document. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, I think that's it for this tutorial. Thanks, guys. And please email me if you have any questions. Alrighty?